All right, we just did conflict resolution, so now we're going to worry about some violence prevention. They kind of play off of each other because if we don't resolve our conflicts, they might turn into violence. And just in general, violence is something that we don't need. Next, please. So, what is violence? It's any behavior that causes physical or psychological harm to a person or damage to property. So people think violence, they just think of physical violence, but it could also be psychological. And or if you were just to be violent towards somebody else's property, that would also be a display of violence. So breaking someone's cell phone because you're mad at them would still be considered violence. It doesn't have to be physically hitting somebody to be considered a violent act. What is the worst form of violence? The answer is homicide. Homicide is pretty much murder. So if you kill someone, you've probably heard of like vehicular homicide. That means that if you got into a car accident and you killed somebody and you were at fault because you were under the influence of like drugs or alcohol, then you could be sent to prison for vehicular homicide. Even though you didn't try to kill the person, it would still be because you were under the influence of something. If it was an actual accident, then obviously they can't blame you unless you were being careless or reckless. There are 4 factors that influence teen violence. So if you can eliminate these factors from your life or not let them persuade you as much, then you're less likely to have a lot of violence in your life. The media has a direct influence. You know, we have violent video games, movies, people see things and they think that, oh, that would be cool. You know, violent pictures and things shared on social media. Being involved in gangs is a factor to violence for teenagers. Gangs are more prevalent in other larger cities usually, but you never know. Having the availability of weapons, I use the example of Columbine, which I'll give you a chance to watch for some extra credit. It's a really good documentary, but these teens that carried out the Columbine school shooting, they were given the weapons to do it, and the people that were involved and gave them the weapons got in a lot of trouble. So if you don't have weapons, there's a reason there's an age limit on things, then teens are less likely to be violent. And then, of course, the use of drugs goes for anybody, but if you're under the influence of something, you're more likely to make poor decisions. It hinders your decision-making skills, and usually being under the influence of drugs, alcohol, tobacco, and things like that bring out the violent side in people. So if you can avoid the influence of media, don't join gangs, don't have weapons readily available for you. This is why it's bad to even threaten to bring a weapon to school, because we have to take that very seriously as if you had the availability of weapons, and police will show up at your house. So it's not funny to joke about saying like, I'm going to bring a gun to school. We take it very seriously, and the reason of that being that first big school shooting of Columbine, which you will get a chance to look at. Drugs affect a person's ability to think clearly, show good judgment, and make wise decisions, which is where drugs are something that you just want to avoid altogether. We'll get more into why drugs are bad this school year, obviously. You'll do a little research on one of the drugs, but yeah, we don't need that in our lives at all. It's good to just stay away from it. What is the zero tolerance policy? This was developed shortly after Columbine. This is why schools have locked entrances. This is why we practice lockdown drills, which, come to think of it, we haven't done that this year yet, but, you know, it's sad that we have to practice that, but it's no exceptions for anybody for any reason. So even if you are the teacher's pet and you're the favorite and you threaten to bring weapons to school, it doesn't matter. We have a zero tolerance policy for violence. If you hit someone or hurt someone and you apologize profusely, it doesn't matter who you are, because there's a zero tolerance policy for violence in schools. So no exceptions for anyone for any reason. There's 3 different forms of these words that people usually get confused with. So the difference between assault, battery, not a battery that charges your GameCube controller, or rape. And assault is unlawful threats or attempt to badly injure someone. So if you threaten to beat someone or attempt to badly injure them, and they could still say you assaulted me. So even if you just hit someone, if you had bad intentions behind it and it didn't even leave a mark and they're not even hurt, it's still assault. It's still not tolerated. If you threaten to hit someone, they could still say that you assaulted them. So watch your words. Battery is the unlawful beating, hitting, and kicking of someone. So this is where you would actually get into a physical fight. They would say you have a battery of charges on you. If you beat or hit or kick them, then that's wrong. And then rape is any kind of, sexual is spelled very wrong. Sorry about that. Bad spelling right there. I don't know what happened, but any kind of sexual intercourse with a person against their will. In the past, some people have defined rape as just sex. That's not true. It has to be against their will. It doesn't just have to be, penetration. It's any sort of intercourse, so oral, anal, vaginal, it doesn't matter. If it's against the person's will, it was rape. We talk about consent when we talk about human sexuality. But basically, if the person cannot consent and say yes, if they are under the influence, they cannot give you consent, then you cannot do it. Abuse is the physical, emotional, or mental mistreatment of one person by another. Abuse, again, is a form of violence. And you can physically abuse someone, you can emotionally abuse them, or mentally mistreat them, or even talking about abusing children. You can neglect them, not giving them proper nutrition, hygiene, clothes. If people aren't providing for you, that is abuse, and it needs to be taken care of. Even if they're not hitting you, they could still be neglecting you or emotionally abusing you by telling you that you are, gum on the bottom of their shoes or something, which I'm sure people use a lot worse language, but again, abuse is a form of violence. What is domestic violence and who does it usually affect the most? Domestic violence is, physical violence, physical abuse that occurs within a family. People that usually are, physically abused within a family are children because they're small and they can't stand up for themselves, elderly because they're weak and they usually can't stand up for themselves, and then the disabled that, can't talk or stand up for themselves and they're weaker than their caregivers. So again, that would fall into the neglect category if you're not taking care of children, elderly, or the disabled. And if you're physically abusing them, that would be domestic violence because it's within a family. Sexual abuse is when a person forces another person to participate in a sexual act against his or her will. It could be, if they're not involved, it wouldn't necessarily be considered rape, but if they're telling you to do something and it's any sort of sexual act against your will, that would be considered sexual abuse, whether it's touching you, snapping a bra strap, or smacking your butt. That would be, if you didn't ask for it, that would be sexual abuse. Sexual harassment, too. Long-term consequences of child abuse and neglect, again, not being taken care of as a child. There's lots of choices. I have used the book in the past, but think about physically. If you beat a child or shake a child, they could have impaired brain development, mentally and emotionally. Suicide would be the worst case scenario, but you're going to have a lot of developmental delays and possibly not trust people. Socially, you could become a criminal or have more violent behaviors growing up. Sexual harassment is any uninvited or unwelcome sexual conduct directed at another person. So any sort of, again, it doesn't have to be full-on abuse, but any sort of language directed at you that is sexual, that is uncalled for, or, touching of the arm in a sexual manner, that's not really abuse because it wasn't a sexual act per se, but it was unwelcomed touching. I will post this for you so you are able to watch it. I usually watch it in class if we have time, which this year with all the hybrid, it's been crazy. I'll give you guys this as an extra credit opportunity. I think it's really good, but it talks about the Columbine high school shooting that happened in Colorado in 1999. And this is why schools take violence so seriously and why the doors are locked during the day and it's hard for people to come and go and we don't just let anybody walk in the building. Why we take threats seriously if students say they're going to bring weapons to school. If we see any red flags, the two people that, took this shooting and brought weapons to school were students at the school, and there were definitely red flags before this happened that they were mentally and emotionally disturbed. So I think it's a great documentary. I think it's important for people to remember the Columbine shooting because this is really what, started all of the zero tolerance policies in schools. And again, this has not been the only school shooting, but this was the first major one. They killed a lot of people, injured a lot more. They tried to explode the school with homemade pipe bombs. So I'll post the worksheet that goes with it if you want to fill it out. Be my guest. It'll be some extra credit if you just want to watch it in your spare time. It's a pretty interesting documentary. Oh, this is the one I've watched in the past. I don't remember what the other one was. But I'll make sure that I post this so that you guys have access to it. But these were the two shooters, and yeah, it's a good documentary. So that would wrap up some interesting history for you on violence prevention and why we take violence so seriously, because this was a very traumatic and prevalent thing that happened in our history in the United States.